Marinette County, Wisconsin, 1976. In an area thought to be safe for campers, a loving couple meets a cruel end.
David was deceased outside of a rustic campground toilet.
He had been shot once in the neck, but once was all it took. This was a fatal shot with a lot of blood.
400 yards away, in ferns and bushes and brush in the woods, they found the female victim.
She too had been killed by 2 shots, but not until after she had been raped.
What could drive a person to commit such a monstrous act?
This was sexually motivated. He wanted to sexually assault Ellen, but he had to get rid of David to do that.
Campers report sightings of a mysterious individual lurking in the park.
They saw an individual walking out of the woods carrying a rifle.
2 people killed. The woman is brutally raped. The people in the community would be afraid and shocked and dismayed that it would happen here.
Police follow all leads, but the case turns cold.
They worked on it very, very hard for several years and followed several leads, and nothing seemed to pan out.
Police just ran out of options, ran out of possibilities, and nothing further could be done.
It seems the killer got away with it. That is, until new forensic science becomes available. Criminals who have hidden in the shadows for years find there's no escaping science and their own family DNA. Welcome to Bloodline Detectives. McClintock County Park, a scenic natural park located in Marinette County, Wisconsin. In 1976, it's a popular spot for camping and outdoor activities.
Marinette County is a very rural area in northeastern Wisconsin. A large portion of it is wooded. It has a large county national forest.
McClintock County Park has a small campground on the south part of it, and north part of it there's another parking area. There's some hiking trails there.
It's a very, very secluded park. It's kind of a big circular driveway that has little offshoots that are campsites. It's maybe a 1 acre park. It borders a little creek.
But in this seemingly serene park, a shocking discovery is about to be made.
On July 9th, 1976, a park caretaker, his name was Stanley, he went into the camp area, and when he got to the restroom, which is basically like an outhouse, he saw a body.
It's not the type of thing anybody would normally find or see, and I would assume that he was terrified and kind of shaken and didn't really know what to do.
He went up to the mail and couldn't get a response, and so there was no telephone in McClintock Park at that time. And right after he made this discovery, there was another man, Lance Temper. He and his girlfriend were happened to drive through the McClintock Park camping area, and Stanley flagged him down and said, hey, there's this man over here that's not responsive. Lance Temper was actually an off-duty Marinette police officer. And so Lance Temper went over and discovered that the male was deceased. And so Stanley, after hearing that, drove up to Goodman Park, which had a telephone, and that's about a 10-minute drive.
After rushing to Goodman Park, Stanley comes across the payphone.
And so then Stanley went up and called Marinette County Dispatch and was received at like 2:53 p.m. The first patrol officer was Deputy Giroux, and so he went there and, yes, helped to secure the scene basically with tape, indicating that it was a police scene and then people could not enter without authorization.
They knew enough that this was probably going to be a big enough scene that they needed to contact the State Division of Justice. So basically they had just secured the scene that night as it was getting close to dark when most help was able to arrive, and waited until the crime lab and Department of Justice arrived in the morning.
When they arrived and they saw the body of the male by the women's restroom there, they looked around. Basically what he was wearing was a t-shirt, some shorts. He had a camera that had been around his neck. He had a hat that was not on his head anymore, but was on the ground next to him.
Items of clothing that may be damp or whatever, you want to make sure that you put those in paper bags and preserve them, not in plastic bags. If you put them in plastic bags, the evidence will deteriorate quickly. The sheriff's office did an excellent job of preserving the crime scene and immediately requesting a field response unit from the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory, rather than trying to pick up things on their own that they may or may not have handled appropriately.
They also found a wallet as well, and that was significant because if it had been a robbery, then they would have expected that valuables would have been taken, and that was not the case.
They found a billfold that had his identification in it, and they got his name off of that.
The male victim was identified as David Schuldes.
After identifying the homicide victim, detectives search the area for more evidence. They discover a nearby tent where further horror awaits them.
When the officers went and viewed the tent, they were able to determine that there was probably a female who was with him, but not, of course, located at the scene at that time.
Now, Lance Temper had gone to the campsite. There was a car, an AMC Gremlin, and had looked inside the car, and he noted a female's purse inside the car. But at that point, they did not locate the female.
It was shortly after they began the search that they did locate the body of Ellen Matthews. They located her about 150 yards away from David, and she was in a wooded area, and she was partially clothed.
There was a short sleeve summer weight sweater that was partially over her head. It appeared to investigators that she was possibly had been stripped because the undergarments were gone, but the shorts were partially on.
They did locate her underwear about 10 to 15 feet away from the body.
In Wisconsin, the coroner is called to the scene of any unexpected death and any violent death. The coroner makes the pronouncement of death. The bodies would have been transported to Madison.
During the autopsy, they're looking for the cause and manner of death.
It was determined that David Schuldes died pretty much immediately with a gunshot wound to the neck. Ellen Matthews, it was determined that she had died from 2 gunshot wounds, one to the chest, one to the upper abdomen.
She likely was shot in the abdomen first. That would not have killed her. It would have dropped her to the ground. The shot that likely would have killed her would have been the shot to the right breast, going out the left breast, because it transected the aorta and the heart.
Because of some of the scrapes and scratches and cuts and the semen found in her shorts, they pretty much determined that there was a sexual assault that occurred. By all accounts from the parents and from her friends and family, she would not have fought back. She was one that was not into confrontation. She was very meek, mild-mannered. At one point, she had even had a conversation with her mother about if something would ever have happened like that, would she fight back? And she replied no, she would just let it happen and pray to God that she lived to get through it.
Marinette County detectives attend the funerals of both victims on the off chance they notice attendees acting suspiciously.
They went to the young couple's funeral and were vigilant for people who were not members of the family, were not friends, who were hanging out there for what reason? Because sometimes killers do get a kick out of seeing how people react to their crimes, the mourning, the grief that people are suffering. Some of them, shall we say, get off on it.
It's just one more step that police departments and sheriff's offices can take to try and develop information when none exists. It's got to be extremely devastating. I simply can't imagine going through that. I have a young daughter who enjoys camping and goes camping by herself. And every time she does that, I worry about it because of my memory of this case.
The people in the community would be afraid and shocked and dismayed that it would happen here. 2 people killed, the woman is brutally raped, and we don't know who the person is.
Investigators are now on the hunt for suspects in this double homicide, but will their leads be strong enough to catch this cold-blooded killer? In McClintock County Park, Marinette County, Wisconsin, a young couple are brutally murdered on July the 9th, 1976, in the popular camping ground. The victims are identified as a soon-to-be married couple, 25-year-old David Schuldes and 24-year-old Ellen Matthews. Schuldes had been shot in the neck, and tragically, Matthews had been sexually assaulted before being fatally shot by the killer.
David was a 25-year-old male. He was attending the University of Wisconsin in Green Bay and worked at the Green Bay newspaper. Ellen, she had graduated from the University of Wisconsin Green Bay and worked in the library there. They were a happy young couple and they were engaged.
They had no enemies and they just enjoyed getting out in nature and spending time together.
They like to camp and they like to get away and do things. Appeared by all accounts to just be a young couple in love, planning to be married later that year, and they were excited about that.
In '76, it was pretty rare to see any kind of homicides or violent crimes being committed in Marinette or Marin County.
It just always stood out to me as like, how could something like this happen there?
In fact, to this day, people don't go to McClintock Park out of fear and because of what had occurred there.
Marinette County detectives appealed to the local community for any information that could lead them to the killer.
They went all over Marinette County to different convenience stores, campgrounds, just any place that people would have frequented, trying to see if anybody saw anyone suspicious or anything suspicious. They did an immense amount of work on the ground to try to develop any type of lead.
People went to Goodman Park a lot more than they did McClintock because of the amenities. There was electricity there was showers and things like that up in that park in the 70s. It was a little more popular with campers to be up there. Our victims attempted to go to that park prior to settling on McClintock Park, but that park was full with campers. One of them being an individual that was camping in Goodman Park at the time. He believed he'd seen them about 1:30 time frame drive through Goodman Park where he was camping. Later that afternoon, a short time later, him and his family went for a ride and went down to McClintock Park. As they were driving through the park, they did notice the same vehicle. So they made note of it again and said, hey, there's that car again. It was a purple colored Gremlin, and the Gremlin was our victim's car. And they didn't think much of it until, of course, the news broke that there was a double homicide in that park. They arrived approximately 2 p.m. on July 9th, 1976. Set up their camp, put things away. Their tent was very neat and tidy. David did enjoy taking pictures of the wildlife and things like that. So finding him with a camera around his neck Officers at the time believed that they were probably attempting to go for a nature walk and see some of the wildlife in the area. Ellen had to use the bathroom, so she went into one of the outhouses, and when David was waiting outside, somebody from a distance fired a round and shot him through his neck with a high-powered rifle. At that point, Ellen was taken from the bathroom, marched into the wooded area where she was sexually assaulted. After the sexual assault occurred, the suspect allowed her to put her jean shorts back on, and as she was putting her shirt back over her head, when it just got over her head, is when we believe the shots were fired, striking her in the chest and the abdomen, killing her.
A murder like this, in such a peaceful, quiet place of such a young couple, with so few clues, would make people panic, would frighten them into thinking there's someone out there who is killing people, who is still out there doing this, and will he do it again?
As the word got out about the murders in McClintock Park, some information was generated. There was a person that had camped in McClintock Park earlier that week and had said that during the night he heard some noise outside of his camper and was concerned, but he thought it might be a bear. So he had a rifle in his camper, and he opened the door of his camper and fired the shot, and he heard some commotion, and that was the end of that. Never any idea if it was a raccoon, a bear, or a person. There were two other people that came forth with information. They were two police officers from Green Bay, Wisconsin, which is about an hour south of Marinette County. He and his wife and another officer and his wife were there camping prior to the murders in McClintock Park. As they were sitting around a campfire in the evening, they said they noticed a person standing off some distance in the woods. They could see the silhouette of an individual standing there. They started to walk toward that individual, and the person disappeared. So they came back, sat around the campfire some more, got a little bit later in the evening, and noticed a silhouette some distance away in the woods again. That time, instead of going toward the individual, they went to their tent to retrieve their service weapon. When they came back, the individual was gone again. At the time, they thought it was suspicious, but didn't give it a lot of thought until they also learned of the murders in McClintock Park, and at that time, they came forward with that piece of information.
While examining the vicinity of the crime scene, investigators locate a vital piece of evidence.
Investigators recovered a bullet fragment, a jacket from a fence that was outside of the outhouse. That bullet had gone through David's throat, and that one had grooves and striations on it that the crime lab was able to tell our investigators that if you locate this gun, we can positively ID it. So a lot of effort went into looking for a .30 caliber rifle, which is what they determined caused the homicide.
Unfortunately, .30 caliber weapons are extremely common in northern Wisconsin. It's a very common hunting weapon. So in the course of the investigation, we collected a number of weapons, .30 caliber weapons, and submitted them to the crime laboratory, none of which of course matched the bullets that were recovered at the scene.
The day after these homicides occurred, two young men indicated to their parents that they might have seen the suspect in the case. McClintock Park has a sister park that is actually a walking park. It's about a half a mile north of the campgrounds. And they had stopped there at the time, and they were walking around down by the river when they heard a gunshot.
Sounded like a rifle shot. These were young men that were experienced hunters and grew up around that, so they knew what a rifle shot sounded like.
Those two got back in the vehicle, and then they traveled out to the main road, and they drove south towards McClintock Park Campground. As they were driving, they look off to the right and they see an individual who they described as about 20 to 30 years old, dressed in a military-style jacket, wearing boots, and carrying what they thought was like a .30 caliber rifle. And he was walking through the woods at a pretty good pace. They assumed he was about 15 to 20 feet away from them when they drove by.
Unusual, but not unheard of. People do hunt out of season. That's called poaching. That does happen here. And so that's kind of what they thought was happening. Somebody was hunting out of season.
And didn't give it a whole lot more thought until they heard about the homicide investigation.
So they briefly caught a glimpse of this man and described that man to law enforcement as best they could. Law enforcement engaged the services of a composite artist, and they developed a pretty rudimentary sketch of this person that they saw. There was also, on the other side of the road from where this man had been spotted, the other side of Parkway Road, a Plymouth vehicle, and one of the young men was able to give a partial license plate. It appeared to be like a Michigan license plate.
Well, obviously, one of the first things that we did was contact the Michigan State Police and got a printout of any license plate that could possibly come up with that combination.
So law enforcement went off what they had, which was this person walking with the .30 caliber rifle and the description and the composite, as well as looking for this vehicle. They went and scoured all of the surrounding campgrounds or convenience stores, any place that may have information where somebody may have driven through. And so then asked people if they had seen a vehicle similar to the one found across the road, if they had seen anyone matching that description or seen anything suspicious at all, or if they had seen Ellen and David. Unfortunately, the leads really weren't significant at that time. The main thing they were focusing on, again, was the composite sketch. That's really the only thing that they had that was solid at the time.
I put together the sightings by the 2 Green Bay police officers and the murders in McClintock Park. I was convinced that it was somebody who was either from the area or had been in the area, or at the very least was very comfortable in the woods. And unfortunately, the 2/3 of northern Wisconsin is a wooded area, and there are lots of people that are comfortable in the woods.
Investigators are unable to identify the mysterious man in the woods. Weeks turn into months without new leads. Despite their best efforts, Marinette County investigators are losing momentum.
In the later 70s, it really dropped off, not due to lack of effort or lack of wanting to solve the crime. They had gone through all the investigative leads that they could, and it didn't lead them anywhere to a resolution.
It was a cold case because of how old it was getting, but it certainly was one that if somebody wanted to say something, if something came our way, it was investigated. So it never really was inactive, but we all had our moments of doubt. Are we ever going to be able to solve this?
The case may be cold, but Marinette detectives do not give up hope of solving this harrowing double homicide. As the years pass, advancements in forensic technology offer newfound hope. Can the killer's DNA unlock the key to this mystery? Marinette County, Wisconsin. On July the 9th, 1976, 25-year-old David Schuldes and his girlfriend, 24-year-old Ellen Matthews, are discovered murdered in McClintock County Park. Both victims tragically died from gunshot wounds, and even more disturbing, Ellen was sexually assaulted prior to her death. The double homicide investigation is underway, but new leads are scarce.
Back in 1976, technology was a little bit different than it is now, and they relied heavily on fingerprints and serology and blood typing. The serology is like the analysis of fluids, and then blood typing, if they have blood available, they can like do a type of like A, B, O, or whatever. And in some fluids, like semen, some men are excretors, and you can determine their blood type because they are excretors.
Typically, the best result comes from a blood sample. However, we also can get very pristine DNA samples from semen.
Using the biological samples taken from Ellen's clothing, investigators identify the blood type of the killer.
All we had was the fact that the person was a type O blood and was a secretor, and unfortunately type O positive is the most common blood type, and so that didn't help us much as far as identifying anyone. It was extremely important that evidence be collected properly. It was extremely critical that our state crime laboratory preserve that evidence, and as long as it was preserved and was able, as technology improved, to eventually develop a DNA profile.
Despite this solid lead, the case once again turns cold. Then, in the mid-90s, a new generation of detectives pull the infamous case off the shelf.
Detective Sergeant Craig Bates, he was tasked with investigating the old homicide cases that were not resolved in Marion County, and one of them was the McClintock County Park homicides. The early 90s was kind of the start of using DNA in police work.
Detective Bates learns about advancements in DNA profiling and considers whether an updated analysis of the biological sample can lead to a suspect.
And he took some of the evidence from the case and sent it to a couple of different labs throughout the country that did DNA analysis. And they were able to develop a DNA profile from the semen that was in the shorts. That profile was entered into the CODIS, which is Combined DNA Identification System. It's a computerized database for known offenders and for unknown suspects. And they kind of compare them on a regular basis. So if you have an unknown suspect profile, you import that into the DNA database, and if it matches, you'll get a notification that there's a match.
The results were negative. We weren't able to connect our suspect's DNA with any other suspects in the United States or any other crimes in the United States. Either the suspect committed another homicide and was in prison and never did have to give his DNA, or the suspect was dead, or maybe on the offhand that somebody who did something this heinous maybe just didn't do it again and never was caught. So ultimately we knew our suspect in the case had never had to submit any kind of DNA to the state.
Despite being unable to locate a match to the suspect profile in the CODIS database, investigators make progress in 2018 thanks to a DNA technology company based in Virginia.
Parabon is a genetic technology company. So they do a number of things, and those include snapshot phenotyping, where they can predict someone's physical traits based on their DNA. So hair color, eye color, shape, face, skin color. If they are contracted to do so from law enforcement, they can create an image that is an approximation of what someone would look like, just based on their DNA. So it's not meant to be a photographic image of somebody. However, it should be consistent with that person's traits.
Detective Baldwin came in to see me and said, "We need to talk about this. We want your take on this. This is something we should pursue in this case because we have this profile." When I started watching what Parabon Nanolabs was doing and CC Moore's work and her associates' work, I almost came off of my chair. I remember thinking, my goodness, yes, we have to do that.
We primarily work cases where there's an unidentified violent criminal, a rapist or a murderer. Many of these cases are very old. They've been cold cases for years or decades. We also work some more active cases. So what we are trying to do is help law enforcement identify the person responsible for a violent crime. And if it's a more active case, we might even be able to help them stop that criminal in their tracks.
Then we coordinated with the crime lab and them to provide the DNA sample to them so they could do their work on it.
And Parabon did do a phenotype sketch of the suspect based on the DNA found in Ellen Matthey's shorts.
They told us that it was a male primarily of Northern European descent, fair complected, either like reddish or light brown hair, blue eyes, and probably had some freckling. It was like 40 years after the event. So if he was 25 at the time, 65 would have been his approximate age, we thought, when we conducted the sketch through Parabon. After we did get that sketch, we had a press conference and put that out to the TV stations.
To the newspapers and to the public, asking if there were any new leads or information that could be generated based on the suspect, having these particular physical characteristics.
And we developed probably about 70 leads from various people. We started to track down these people and talk to them. Hey, what do you know about this case? Would you be willing to consent to give us DNA to compare in the case?
And we were able to go out and swab each one of those individuals. None of the 70, of course, ever hit on the DNA profile that our suspect had.
The suspect is yet to be found, but investigators continue in progressing the case. They team up with Parabon Nanolabs once again to try a revolutionary forensic technique that is cracking the coldest of cold cases across the country.
So when Parabon told us about the sketch and the genetics of the person, they said another service they do is this investigative genetic genealogy, and they told us that based on the person's DNA, they could compare DNA to people that are in other data banks and try to match DNA and build family trees from that.
I'm one of the early pioneers of using autosomal DNA to help people learn more about their family tree and their genetic heritage. Autosomal DNA is the type of DNA you inherit from all of your great-grandparents back to your third and fourth great-grandparents. So you inherit 50% from your mother and your father, everyone does, about 25% from each of your grandparents, and about 12.5% from each great-grandparent. And so it can inform us about all the different branches of your family tree. And it became apparent very early on in my work that this incredibly powerful tool for human identification was applicable to law enforcement cases, both unidentified human remains and identifying unknown violent criminals.
On December the 21st, 2018, Parabon Nanolabs provide Marinette County investigators with a strong lead. The genealogists have generated a pool of suspects using the killer's DNA. They suspect he belongs to the Van Evenhoven family from the Green Bay area, Wisconsin.
They had a number of children, including 4 sons. They looked at the Van Evenhoven sons in the beginning of 2019.
Todd Baldwin was the primary lead investigator in this case, and the first of the brothers that they focused on was the closest in age to what we thought the person was, and they wound up doing a garbage or a trash pick at his house.
As soon as he put the garbage out, me and another detective went, obtained the garbage.
And they went through it and they developed things out of the garbage that they thought would contain DNA.
One of them being an inhaler.
The DNA collected from that garbage pull, it was in the right family according to the crime lab, but not the right person. Investigators progressed down to another brother who lived up in Florence County. An investigator named Tom Shallow has a cabin just down the road from this other brother. And he said, yeah, he comes over for coffee all the time. So one day, the brother came over for coffee. Tom picked the coffee cup up and sent that in as well. And that was the same thing. Same family, wrong brother. That narrowed us down to 2 brothers. One was deceased, and then we had Ray, who was still alive.
Detectives waste no time tracking down Raymond Van Evenhoven to get a DNA sample from him. Are investigators finally about to corner this elusive killer? Marinette County, Wisconsin, 2019. Detectives are investigating the 1976 murder of 25-year-old David Schuldes and 24-year-old Ellen Matthews, who were shot in McClintock Park. Tragically, Ellen was also sexually assaulted prior to her death. Now, over 40 years later, Parabon Nanolabs, utilizing investigative genetic genealogy, have narrowed the suspect list down to 4 brothers. Detectives run further DNA tests, which rules out 3 brothers, leaving just one, Raymond Van Evenhoven.
Raymond lived in a real remote area on a dead-end road. And I surveilled him for approximately a month, was unable to ever obtain any kind of DNA left behind from him. And he also didn't have a garbage pickup where he was located. You had to take your garbage to the dump. So it was going to be hard to obtain garbage from him. So I asked an individual I used to work with quite often if he could do something for me and try to obtain Raymond Van Evenhoven's DNA.
The current Chief Deputy of Oconto County and Detective Baldwin developed a plan to conduct a survey with Ray, because Ray kind of lived in the middle of nowhere and it was hard to actually do surveillance and follow him around and try to get a discarded cigarette butt or something like that.
They knocked on his door and said, "Hey, we're doing a survey of what you think of policing in this particular township." Gave him the survey. Raymond filled out the survey, put it in the envelope, and licked the envelope to seal it.
Raymond's saliva sample is compared to the DNA left at the crime scene over 40 years ago. It is a match.
We were very excited because we finally had narrowed down on a suspect, and now it was just a matter of putting the rest of the pieces of the puzzle together as best as we could. We developed a plan to go arrest Ray and conduct a search warrant of his residence at the same time, and we went there, and Detective Baldwin and I went in first while the rest of the crew staged to conduct the search warrant. And we met Ray at his house. He invited us inside. We explained, hey, we're from the Marinette County Sheriff's Department and you're under arrest for homicide. Ray just kind of put his head down and turned kind of pale and just went along with us. He didn't argue, he didn't ask what this was about, nothing.
Throughout the investigation, we were under the impression that the suspect was going to be probably in his 60s or so. I never expected that I'd be handcuffing a 82-year-old man for first-degree homicide.
We were hoping we could find the murder weapon or some kind of evidence. Ultimately, we did find a .30 caliber 30-30 rifle in his garage.
They found some shell casings. They sent those off to the crime lab, but those were not a match for the bullet fragments that had been found at the crime scene. But again, this was 40-something years after the homicides. Very likely, he just disposed of any shell casings that was used.
He grew up in the rural Green Bay area, in the Swamico area. He worked as a metal worker his entire life, and we were told from talking to people that he was either working or he was drinking and drunk and angry.
Raymond was 20 years old in 1950 when he was arrested for attacking a couple of teenage girls, a 17-year-old and a 16-year-old. The 17-year-old was walking with friends when he grabbed her and pulled her into a cemetery. She was screaming and her friends came to her aid. He was already married, but he attacked these 2 young women. He spent 6 months in prison, and that seemed to be that, although nowadays we would put him on a sex offender registry, which would flag him in a way that didn't happen back in the 1950s and 60s.
Raymond is brought in for questioning over the murders of David Schuldes and Ellen Matthews back in 1976.
And then when Detective Baldwin kind of brought out the pictures of the victims, Ray got kind of angry and really defensive. He didn't show any signs of sympathy for the victims. or any remorse for what he'd done.
And claimed to have absolutely no knowledge of the crimes of David and Ellen.
Why you kill these two people?
Why did you do that?
Well, you killed them, right?
You killed them. You meant
I did. I don't even know.
You might not know them, but you killed them.
Well, I didn't.
Does it ever wake you up at night? Ray, does it ever wake you up at night? This doesn't ever cross your mind, ever? Nope, never? So what you did there doesn't even matter. Don't even care. Remember the blood flying out of her when you shot her, Ray. And then shooting her a second time.
You shot him.
Hey, you shot him. You shot him. You did. I did. Yeah, you did. I did not. You did.
I did not.
Well, then how did your semen get in those shorts, Ray?
I don't know how to get there. Put it there.
How would I get your semen?
Well, give me a shit. Go right there.
I'll tell you how you did. You sexually assaulted her.
No.
That's all got there.
No.
He was charged with 2 counts of what was then called first-degree murder in the Wisconsin statute. The sexual assault charge we could not go forward with because at that time there was only a 6-year statute of limitations, and that had expired.
Now charged for the murders, Raymond Van Evenhoven is put in custody while awaiting trial.
We were concerned that he was going to have some kind of medical event or medical condition, which was going to, take him away from us before we'd had a chance to put him on trial. He had a stroke, and he ended up being sent to Mendota Mental Health in Madison to be evaluated. Initially, they thought he was probably not competent to stand trial or aid in his defense, and ultimately they decided he was competent.
The trial did not commence until, I believe it was July 19th of 2021. So yes, when you're dealing with someone in their 80s who did have some health issues, certainly that's a concern.
He was wheeled into court, but I thought his demeanor was just cold and didn't care what was going on around him.
Prosecutor Mark Williams gave the opening statement for the state and just basically outlined the evidence that we'd collected from the crime scene, and particularly the shorts, and how that was collected, how those were preserved, and then the DNA from those shorts from, 45 years earlier, and then ultimately a DNA profile was taken from that. He then talked about the different investigative techniques that the Marinette County Sheriff's Office had used and how we ultimately came to the Van Evenhoven family and to Raymond Van Evenhoven himself, and how the evidence is going to show the inarguable link between Mr. Van Evenhoven and the DNA in Ellen Matthews, and how we were going to put that together and show that only Raymond Van Evenhoven could have killed Ellen and David.
Despite the evidence stacked against him, Raymond's defense tries to maintain his innocence.
They tried to separate the sex and the semen from the homicide, to try to say that there wasn't a link between the two. And then they tried to argue that this male that had been seen by our 2 witnesses when they were driving on Parkway Road, they tried to argue that that was some different. Somehow, Raymond had sex with Ellen the day or 2 before she goes up with her fiance on a camping trip, and then some other random male kills them. The jury didn't buy that argument.
The jury deliberates for just 2 hours before reaching a verdict. August the 26th, 2021, 84-year-old Raymond Van Evenhoven is sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences.
You find out who it was, they're convicted, they're sentenced to prison, and Ray died within a few months of going to prison.
We knew his age, we knew his health, so I didn't expect him to live very long, but kind of wish that he could have hung on as long as he possibly could have, so he could at least suffer in prison for the next few years anyways.
The only thing I can say about somebody like that is he had to be a psychopath. He knew what he was doing when he was going through the woods carrying a rifle. David and Ellen just happened to be in the wrong spot. He saw them there and took his weapon and killed them both, knowing full well what he was planning to do and carrying it out in the manner that he did.
This case is a really good illustration of how powerful investigative genetic genealogy is for revealing secrets of all kinds. Your DNA can absolutely tell the story, no matter how old a case is, no matter when or where it happened.
This young couple now would be grandparents themselves. They would be close to celebrating their golden wedding anniversary. And thanks to this technology and thanks to the preservation of evidence, they now lie in their graves side by side with this crime solved.
These young people were killed 24, 25 years old, never had a chance to live their lives.
A tragedy. He went on with his life for that long, and Ellen and David were taken as mid-20s, a vibrant young couple. Didn't seem fair, didn't seem right. But in the end, justice was done, and we're proud of that.